Hello, guys. I'm Nigel de Jong.
My name is Paul Elliott. This is a special podcast to celebrate 25 years of Show Racism the Red Card. 25 years ago, I just really packed up my career with Chelsea. That was back in the mid-90s. And I suppose I was at that juncture in my life. You know, where was my next steps going to be? Was it going to be into the coaching? 3 or 4 years prior to that, I co-founded a Kick It Out organisation. So obviously the anti-racism, anti-discrimination element was very prevalent within football. So I was kind of at that sort of crossroads. Was I going to go left or right into the coaching, or the other way to really, shall we say, step up my activism to try and make a positive contribution to an area that I'm very passionate about.
25 years ago, I was about 11 years old, and I was just on the start to taking football serious as a young teenager, playing in the Ajax academy. Of course, in that time as well, you know, we were very aware of the differences in the national team. What you said before as well about the famous photo that divided two groups inside of the national team. We had a white side and a black side, and that was very aware in that time as well. And of course, you know, in that time, we didn't have the social media outlets, we didn't have the news outlets to speak about it. So what we seen was only what was shown to us on television and in the newspapers. So at that stage, it was not really, of course, racism was always there, especially when me growing up in the schools and in the black neighborhood that I was, going to different kind of places in Holland. But that was really the first time that we really got aware of it as young kids, like, oh, wow. So there is actually a difference even in the national team, because for us, you know, at that point, national team was for us a boyhood dream. So if we were seeing that at that time, that got us a lot of thinking at that time.
Having been sort of my generation before, I suppose, I mean, we had a brutal time because there was no sort of legislation, no framework in place. And I was at that generation in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, where we got all the sort of monkey chance, banana throwing. We knew the issues, we felt it, we were in receipt of it. But I suppose moving forward, I think around about that 1990s, 95 was the Euros, obviously then in the UK. And I think I remember as a young player coming through at Charlton Athletic that I actually went about 2 or 3 times actually to Holland, you know, to play in international tournaments. And I was really empowered by the amount of young black players that were playing there. And I think that, if I'm being honest with you, Holland was probably the last country that I would consider, especially being, if you looked at like the diversity and the makeup of that country. And for many, many years, you know, they've always historically had many black players. And I suppose, you know, when you make reference to that photo, I was really so surprised that you saw like a them and us, because, you know, I suppose, Nigel, where I'm coming from, and I think as football has evolved, we both realise how important that inclusion is within the dressing room. And if you haven't got, it's like working in a business, working in an office, if you haven't got everybody that's aligned and you're together and you've got the same values and you're my buddy, and if things aren't going well on the pitch, you know, I'm going to be there to support you, you know, it's like saying you've got 2 centre halves or 2 centre midfield players, you know, one is black, one is white, you don't get on. How on earth are you able to work for each other, be part of the same team and fight? So I'm really fascinated, you know, professionally, knowing that was going on. There was a clear division inside the football dressing room. What impact did that have professionally, you know, on the relationships within the squad?
Yeah, I think, you know, what you said as well, it was a shock for us as well, you know, when we seen that picture, and also when it came out in the news that it was such a diversity inside of such a strong core. But you gotta take it back a little bit, because this is 96. In 95, Ajax won the Champions League, if you can remember, on the Van Gaal,
yes, I do.
with that team, the young team. And because of that success of 95, a year later came the Bosman
rule. Yeah, the
era.
Bosman rule,
Remember?
wasn't it?
Yeah, the Bosman era. So it was a time that the transition in football been made about transfers, and there was the black core of Ajax '95 with the Seedorf and the Davids and the Bogarters and the stuff, and the agents came into place, the super agents, because before that clubs had the power to let players know they have a contract. Yeah, exactly. So you have to take that back. What happened in '96? That was at Ajax at '95 when the Bosman era just made a diversion inside of the dressing room, because the white part of Ajax at that time, we're talking about the brothers De Boer, we're talking about Van der Sar, Blind, and them. They were loyal to the club, and sense of we don't want to push out for a transfer. So when that other side, the black side of that squad in '95 said like, no, wait a minute, we have our own rights, we can do whatever we want, we're looking for a transfer. They took that whole process and the problems in the '96 national team. And you gotta understand, the biggest part of that national team were players of Ajax. So they took their own problems from '95. '96 prior to the end of '96 season into the national team. So that's why the division came in the national team as well. So this had something else to do than only being like seeing a division about racism. This was more a fact of having two camps, and of course.
I mean, Nigel, that's just so unfortunate, because you know and I know, as former players, I think the Bosman ruling was great for football, because it allowed, for financially, for players, because ultimately, players are like any employee. If you work in an organisation, if it's business or it's Nike or it's an office, and you work for a period of, say you sign a 3-year contract, at the end of that 3-year contract, you should have the human right to go to another business, and there should be no compensation.
So, but we know that now, right? We know that now. Back in the
time,
it was something totally new. So everybody was kind of scared to go in that way, because everybody was trying to stay safe in their own lane and saying like, listen, I have a contract. I'm committed to the club. I don't want any issues. I don't want to mess about with my salary. So I'm just going to stay in my lane and just make sure that the club is happy with me. So this was a whole new, different kind of thing. Now we know, of course, years after, what we can do as players and the rights that we have as players. But back then, it was such a culture shock. It was a culture shock.
I'm so sad about that, because it was a great, Ajax historically, everybody knows the quality of players that comes through, has been absolutely, arguably for me, the best in terms of generation in world football, because historically, Barcelona's been sort of great to a point, but it doesn't have the history with Johan Cruyff and back to Ajax of the 70s, the 80s,
But I think in the Netherlands, because we're quite an open country and we're quite, there's not a lot of taboos in our country, and we can talk about freely, and we can talk freely about a lot of stuff. And certainly when it comes down to football, everybody has an opinion. You have the right to say whatever you want. So I think we're one of the first countries, that really spoken openly about it, about the situation that was happening in football, and also for the rights of football players, and that also with the diversity that came along with it, showing two different camps with two different skin colors. So I think it is fair to say that we're one of the first. But that being said, it was said in that transition in '96 that it happened because we lost the tournament because of the problems that we had, and it was a good thing as well that we reconcile after in that 2 years after that, because everybody made their move after the Bosman period. Some went to Barcelona, other went to AC Milan, and we came together as a group. And you remember how what happened in the '98 tournament. We were there, so we came together as a nation and said like, listen, we are bigger than that. We are bigger than the issues that we have before. We have to come together as a nation, as a group of players, and just talk our differences out, and just be as good as a group of players, and show the rest of the world as well, not only Holland, but also the rest of the world, that we even can get along, even when we had our differences back in the past.
And who led that, Nigel? How was that led? How was that activated, those conversations? Was it the coach, or was it the senior players? Was it people outside? How did you get that unity? Because it just shows that the issues can be dealt with, they can be addressed with the right leadership understanding.
Yeah, I'm not sure who really was into that, because I never was in the dressing room. I was never behind the scenes. But I can just imagine it was the experienced players back then, but also the coach was there at that time. And he said like, listen, if I have to work with a group of players that are not together as a unit, I can't even start the tournament. So I can just imagine as a coach, you're saying like, listen, put your differences aside. You don't have to be each other's best friends. I'm not asking you that, but be the best colleague for each other, despite the difference in skin color and despite the difference that we had back in the days with each other in '96. So I can only imagine it just one, the experienced players, but also be part of the staff and said like, okay, listen, we gotta go for it, and this is what's gonna happen, and let's go and just try to make the best tournament out of it.
And Nigel, moving forward, how did that, when then you had your generation playing for the national team, what was the atmosphere then like? What was the environment then like? What it was like in the dressing room? Did it carry anything from the past into your generation? Any of the issues or challenges?
No, not at all. I'm just trying to think about my generation. Fortunately, I had a great generation of like 12 years with the same guys, with the Robert, the Farpersi, the Snyders, so on. So we had a great generation. And the good thing was that, we come from, we seen both sides. So we've seen the sides of like how it was, the diversity when it just started in Holland, but also after how it got accepted as well inside of the dressing room, and that you have to go along and accept that you despite having a different skin color, you have to move on and just try to be successful with each other. And the good thing of us, our generation, we've been growing up as kids with each other. That whole 84, 83 generation, when we was 8 or 9 years old, we play against each other, on a domestic level, in different leagues and different tournaments. So we knew each other from way small. So when you're growing up and come all together in that national team, you don't put that differences. You don't see the difference between the skin colors whatsoever. So
and I thought what was interesting, Nigel, that because there's been so many challenges in the United Kingdom, in the UK, and I think what I really respected about Holland also in your country was the opportunities that was also given to black players to naturally become coaches. There are historical challenges in this country for the best part. I mean, we've lost 3 generations. I mean, if you think in the UK, about close to 34, 35% of the players are all levels of black. The only thing, we've only had we've got 4 black, maximum of 5 black coaches. So that underrepresentation has been there many years, and it's never really been acknowledged enough in football. They've been talking about it, but no, it's about then what the process, what the decision-making process, what the boards look like. But in Holland, you've had Ruud, you've had Rijkaard, Edgar Dove. They've all had opportunities to become black players, to transition from players, outstanding black players, into coaches. And that's where we've had problems and still got problems in the UK.
Yeah, and I see that as well. I mean, I've been in the UK. I played in the UK for 4 years, and of course, I still have a lot of contacts in the UK and see what's going on in the UK. And when I see the difference between the UK, which you just mentioned as well, and with Holland, they're at least 12 of 15 to 20 years back when it comes down to giving black coaches opportunity, by even giving the platform to black individuals to do something, just in general, not even in sport, but just in a different, in an overall setting. So when I see that and I see what's going on in Holland, I'm very happy and pleased that I grew up in Holland and see the diversity. I come from a generation that, we mingled a lot. So my parents were white and black, and my colleague was white and black. So it was not only white on white, black on black. So they wrote that whole generation of only being with the same type of race. So for us to see that and going through that whole process of diversity makes it for Holland easier to accept that as well. A black coach can be successful as a white coach. So it doesn't matter which skin color you have in Holland. Nowadays, it's crazy to see. But the opportunities are way more than the UK.
Yeah, I mean that's such a very important point, because with the point that you made about your families, you were socially inclusive. So you wasn't never really excluded. So that same sort of natural social integration, it was just a natural thing in your day-to-day life. So obviously, people's attitudes were very liberal. They look through people. They don't look at colour or race. They just look at the content of your heart. Are you a good person? Are you a nice person? Are you respectful? Are you honest? But as you know, Nigel, the problems in the UK are far more different because the people within that make the decisions,
Right.
there's not enough diversity in those leadership positions, the people with the power. So, and there's an issue about people like hiring people that look like themselves,
Yeah.
you know, and actually understanding how diversity is a great thing, to have diversity of thought, different skills, you know, and I think that's an area where certainly in England we have so much work to do.
Yeah.
And I'm very, you know, considering we're a multicultural, multiracial country, we are still very much, we are not as progressive as somewhere like Holland, to be quite honest with you. And we have so much, you know, if you look at the diversity all over in terms of our coaches and nationalities, you know, and the players, the playing base is not reflective, obviously, in the football administration and also the coaching and the managerial. But there's a lot of good things going on that we're trying to do, but there's so much more work to be done. And a lot of it's about education, isn't it? Hence,
that's what you said. You know, that's perfect. That's exactly the spot on. It's about education. It's about teaching the young kids, and especially on a young age, the generation that comes up now, that the color of your skin doesn't matter, whatever you want to do. You know, for everybody has a dream. And, you know, the thing is in the UK as well is that you have so many jobs and availability for Black community, but to give an opportunity is something else than to actually say, like, okay, the opportunity is there, but actually give the opportunity, you know. And that's, I think, the education part of this is very, very important. And we've seen it now over the last couple of months, especially over the last year and a half. And that's only because of the social media outlets, of the news outlets. I mean, you remember back in the days, as well as I am, we had a small circle if somebody said a racial slur, right? We didn't have an outlet. I didn't have an outlet, say, go on YouTube or go on Instagram. And
go around the world in 5 minutes.
So I had to share it with all my parents, all my siblings, all my best friends that were around me. And maybe the neighbor heard it next week about what happened, you know, in my little circle. So we never had an outlet about saying the things that we could say nowadays. So I think education now is even more important that we have than back in the days.
Yeah, well, I think, if I'm being honest with you, I think the advisory board was important, and I think this was sort of the Football Association actually understanding, you know, if they're going to be football for all, if our national governing body, you know, they have to take the lead, because ultimately we have to look for role models, don't we? Role models is very, very important. And if you haven't got people to look up to, people that can inspire you, you know, then you have a problem. And I think that's been one of the things that's been really missing over the years. I think we've needed prominent role models, but critically in very prominent positions, positions of leadership. Because I think there's nothing better, like Nigel, if we're footballers, you know, and we're looking up and we can see coaches, you know, that look like us, then you look up into the directors, you know, into the senior executive, and actually you can see people who have got senior positions in football clubs that look like you. And I think that's where I come back to the point about what Raheem Sterling said, which really has inspired me when he says, you know, when we're talking about the issues of racism in the United Kingdom, when I look up, I don't see people that look like me. So he is saying when he looks up, you know, so when he looks into the directors, into the executive, there isn't enough people of colour that look like him. And I think that they're very, very powerful statements. And I think Raheem Sterling, for one, you know, and you look at Marcus Rashford, they've been brilliant about the word role models that set the example. I think they've been brilliant. And I think also my generation, it was always very difficult to speak out because you were seen as a problem. You were seen as somebody that might have an attitude. So you were kind of excluded. But I think COVID-19, the last 15 months has been, you know, well, we all know because we've all experienced it in some shape or form. But what it's done, it's highlighted so much of the economic, social issues, you know, that divide in society. And I think what that's done is made people realise that there is a class divide, there is an economic divide. And I think people are realising now that there has to be equality, there has to be a better balance. And I think that's hopefully a lot of good is going to come out, not just obviously we want in the world, but also in football about giving people opportunities, because your Raheem Sterling's, your Marcus Rashford's, I've spoken out about, hey, those guys have spoken up about institutional, structural, systemic racism in football. And I think, it's created a consciousness, it's created a debate, and one of the things that really, I think, really empowered me when I listened to Gareth Southgate, our England manager, who's a brilliant man, who's a wonderful man. And when he speaks about he's had white privilege where others haven't, to hear an England manager talk so openly, transparently, honestly, I think it's a really positive thing to set the example. So I'm hopeful that so much good is going to come out of this.
No, I'm pretty sure. Everything happens for a reason, I always say. And I think this pandemic really opened the eyes from a lot of people, especially in the UK, but around the world as well. And I think what you said, it was a great statement. When you said about, I don't see a lot of, when I look up, I don't see a lot of people that look like us. And Raheem is right. And of course you need role models. But I think what you just mentioned, having a Gareth Southgate who is white, having other white people in this position who have power inside of football, speaking out and also supporting the Black community, I think that helps even more, to bring equality inside of the football business, because you cannot do it alone. We as a Black community, you cannot do it alone. You need also people from the other side, from the white side, speaking out and saying, like, listen, this is not the way how we have to go forward. We have to show respect to the culture. We have to show equality. We have to give equality. We have to give more opportunities in the football world and in the world in general. Otherwise, you're just gonna stand still, and it's gonna be a continuous loop of not being successful.
When I use the phrase, the impossible might be now possible. Because I think it's been spoken about, and I think there's been historical challenges in this country, but people of colour, Black people in leadership positions, and I just hope now, look what the world has gone through as we're talking. Look what we're experiencing. Look how the world is living, and I just feel now that out of the most brutal adversity that we've all experienced, there has to be, I think there's going to be a lot of good for society, but I think there's going to be a lot of positivity for football. And I think, on the back of this, getting that greater, and this is not just about the FA chairman, this is about Black people, this is about people of colour in boards across the whole of football, in football clubs. So, Jordan Henderson could be at Liverpool, Tyrone Mings could have opportunities at Aston Villa, Jermaine Defoe's playing in Scotland with Glasgow Rangers. This is about accepting that if you meet the criteria, if you have the qualifications, if you give people an opportunity. It's about giving opportunities and not having that, that discrimination, because it is racism. There's, we have to be honest and open, we can't hide the historical issues of structural, systematic and systemic racism. It's there and it will continue to be there. But I feel that if we can, through the power of football and the audience of football, set that example for society to have Black people, to have women, in those positions, imagine the effect this is going to have on other sports, on businesses across football, across the whole world. So I think that's where the beauty and the power of football can do so much social and positive social change.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I always said it myself. I think football in general is the most powerful platform in the world. How to reach a certain group. If you want to educate, if you want to reach out to the generation, if you want to show the world that diversity can be in place, if equality can be in place, I think the football is the best platform. And especially now, what I said before as well, with all the social media outlets, all the news outlets that we have to our availability. So, going forward in that is, for me, it's very important that all these programs got to stay in place. We are so far ahead in Holland. And it's still what you said, there's so much discrimination still going on, and racism sometimes also still in Holland, even though we are so diverse country, there's still racism in place. I'm not here saying that me being a Black man as being a black boy, never experienced racism. Oh, I've been called
Of
so
course.
many names over the years.
I
But
agree.
how thick is your skin, first of all, and what you want to do with the experience that you had. You know, how do you want to educate, and how do you want to go forward? So, you know, that's my next question for you as well. The programs that you have, kick it out, and
Yes.
show racism the red card. You know,
Yes.
a lot of players and a lot of people are always asking me, like, is it falling under the same umbrella? But it's two different things, right?
Yeah.
So can you explain a little bit these two?
Yeah. I mean, Nigel, that's a very, very good point you make, because I spoke with Jed, who's the CEO of Show Racism Red Card, and Sanjay Bandari, who's the chair of Kick It Out. And what you don't want is duplication.
Yes.
You know, Kick It Out is a campaigning organisation. You know, it campaigns. You know, whereas Show Racism the Red Card, the real focus of that is education through schools. You know, using footballers as role models. You know, and
educate again is so important also in this question.
Well, Nigel, as you know, one thing with education, it never stops. We never stop learning. And I think one of the why I love Show Racism the Red Card, because they're at the roots of the communities in schools. So you're affecting that new generation from now, isn't it? Because when you're a kid, you have certain, when you're 5, 6, 7, those are your important years to learn. And it's very hard to catch up with. And that's where football is such a big power with all the work. Because, you know, players do some brilliant work in schools, you know, the time that they give up, you know, to go into schools and engage and empower with young people. So I think, you know, that education for the next generation is just so important, you know, and Show Racism the Red Card, you know, and Kick It Out. I think they've got both a big role to play in this, a massive role.
We don't know, me being Dutch, Paul being English, we don't know how different cultures are working and how they talking among each other and what kind of, you know, verbal words they're using. So, you know, the situation that we see in Başakşehir, but also the situation that we see with Cavani in England, you know, this is a cultural thing. But I think education can be its place, that certain words in different cultures are sensitive, and you feel offended towards the black community, and especially with what's going on right now everywhere in the world. We live in such a sensitive world at this moment. So everything, you know, what you said is being held under a loop, you know, and just see what you're doing and what you said as well. So I think education is really important, from the UEFA, from the FIFA, from the FA, from all the federations in the world, and saying, like, listen, we got our cultures, especially when it comes down to South American cultures, when it comes down to the East Bloc countries in Europe, they have a different culture. They have different words that they use towards black people or the black community. So let's sit together with their representatives and say, like, listen, how we can go forward, how we can use a certain language, especially in football, that goes along to all the guidelines that we have in place. Because if you don't do that, situations like this will always occur, will always pop up because of differences in cultures. So I truly believe that Cavani is not a racist. I truly believe that the official that said the word against Webo in that match is not a racist. I'm just saying that because of different cultures, we have to come together, take the situation out, and make sure that the situation doesn't occur again.
Yeah. Nigel, you made some excellent points, and I think what needs to happen, if, say, let's use Cavani as an example, he signs for Manchester United.
Right.
So I think you have to look at, say, the PFA, the club. Someone has to take the responsibility to say, with the agent, with the player, you have to have a proper induction. Right. And you have to say, you are joining this club. These, you know, there should be a booklet of information as part of the pack to say, listen, these are the cultures, these are the practices, these are the customs that go on in this country that every player has to sign up to. So there has to be a representative from the union working with the representative from the club. They have to take the responsibility, and then they have to, you know, work with the player to say, this is what's acceptable, this is not what's acceptable.
I fully agree.
So it comes back to a point, you know, communication and education.
Yes.
They're the two things. And then if that happens, because if that would have happened with Cavani, we would never have had the situation, because he would have known, whilst that language might be acceptable within his culture, in his country, but in the UK, it's not acceptable. And these are the reasons why.
Yes, of course. No,
So,
I fully agree, Paul, with you. You know, it's like the same thing. You sign a contract, with a certain club, and in these contracts are protocols, are certain guidelines.
You got your rules, haven't you? You got your
proper rules, how the guidelines.
Right.
For example, you can't go on a ski holiday because there's a danger of you breaking a leg or whatsoever that jeopardize your career. The same thing can be in place, now for the stuff that's going on, for the racism that's going on, for the proper guidelines. And the thing with Cavani as well, he had an example. We all remembered how it went down with Suarez and Efra.
Exactly.
So, and that is his teammate in the national team. So that's being said, we are miles behind when it comes down to proper communication, proper education, because this could be prevented easily if you put the proper guidelines in place.
Exactly. And all they have to do, Nigel, when you have within your contract, you have a supplementary agreement to the contract that stipulates all these things, that you will get educated. Either the union or the club will take that responsibility, and they sign it off, and you sign it off at the same time when you sign the contract.
Right.
So then it's clear. So you have a clear organisation or individual that's taking that responsibility on behalf of the player.
Yeah.
So it's a simple fix. It's just about recognising that it's a priority, because Manchester United have lost, and I agree with you. Listen, I look at Cavani, how very articulate he spoke. He's a very decent guy. He's a humble man. He's a respectful guy. So I know he meant no offence. I believe that personally, based on what I saw him. So it's unfortunate. Manchester United has lost a top-class player for 3 games.
Yes.
And he's been fined £100,000 out of something that could have been prevented quite easily.
Exactly.
So this is where an example of where football has to be united and all work together. Yes. This is very, very important. And I'm sure there will be a lot of good that will come out of this situation. And so will UEFA, and FIFA. Because and I know, when I was working with all the clubs over the last sort of year or so, I said to them that equality, diversity, and inclusion has to be the thread that joins up the whole of football, from grassroots to the pitch, from the pitch to the boardrooms.
Yeah, definitely.
Equality, diversity, and inclusion must be the golden thread throughout. Yes. And if you can get that right, football will be even more greater than what it is, and the wider social impact will be absolutely spectacular to educate and bring people along using the power of football. As you say, it's the biggest game changer, the power of football.